Let's move on to our next panel, which happens to be an all West Coast panel. I would like to invite Sri Rajan to introduce his panel and the co-panelists. A little bit about Sri. Sri is an Indiaspora member and a partner at Bain Company. Sri was the former chairman and managing director of Bain's India offices. He is currently the vice chairman of Akshay Patra USA. Akshay Patra, as you all know, as you all probably know, is the largest NGO-run school meal program in the world. Sri, welcome, and let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ashish, and thank you to Indiaspora for this event. It was actually very inspiring to hear the stories of the people who have given so much back, both over here and in India. I'm not going to spend too much time introducing the fellow panelists. I just briefly talk about them. But let me assure you that they are a stellar group of people who have done a lot in the area of giving. So let me start with Sumir, who's a co-founder and MD of WestBridge Capital. He's given a lot over the years to various causes, and at least a couple that I know of. One is, of course, Akshay Patra, and the other is Olympic Gold Quest. The second is Stephanie, who is the Director of Impact-Driven Philanthropy Initiative at the Raikes Foundation. And then Ankur Vora, who's the Chief Strategy Officer of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As I mentioned, I'm not going to go through their bios in a great amount of detail, primarily because it's a very long list of accomplishments that each of them has. I would urge you to go and click on the link to see what they have done over the years. But trust me that this is actually a stellar group of people to talk on this topic. What we're going to do is to talk a little bit about what's changed, especially over the course of the last 6 months. And, you know, what a year it's been. I think everyone would generally feel that this is a year that needs to be in the rearview mirror pretty soon. We really can't deal too much more with, you know, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the racial unrest, whether it's fires, natural calamities around the world, whatever that might be. And we are really going to talk about what does this all mean? What has changed in the area of giving, in the area of philanthropy? And so what I'd like to do is to really start with Stephanie. So Stephanie, what are the changes that you have seen in the overall giving space over the course of the last 6 months? And give us a sense of at the overall macro level, and then we can dig a little deeper in the subsequent questions.
I will start by just saying thank you to everyone for inviting me and including me, and how fun it is to see so many familiar faces. Here, because in my job, I actually am a bit of a philanthropy nerd. I've spent my whole career thinking about this field and how to support people to give in ways that are meaningful and can make a real difference. And 2019, to your question, Sri, you know, as we headed into 2020, before we knew what was all coming, 2019, we were kind of tying the strings around, and it was a strong year in the US for giving. The overall giving was up 2.4% in 2019. We came into this year thinking that we were in a good space, especially many of the organizations. That said, you know, 2020 is unprecedented, as we all know, in the challenges that we face. And there has been a strong philanthropic response, both from individuals and from organized philanthropy. And perhaps a belated awakening to the impact of race and racism on just about every issue in the social sector. So we've seen shifts in how we're giving, the rise in mutual aid, give directly to individuals, including direct cash transfers and cash giving, a big rise in collaborative giving, pooling our funds together, funds launched at foundations or intermediaries or other community-based organizations that are pooling our dollars and then re-granting to people and organizations in the communities. And then finally, a real growth in volunteerism and activism, how we're using our time. And all of those things have been really heartening. we think about the overall philanthropic response in our work. We think about it in kind of three big phases. There's immediate relief in the wake of a disaster, where you're providing food aid, as the Asawas have highlighted. Organizations like Feeding America really stepping up to meet the immediate needs of communities. PPE in this crisis, other things like that. Then there's a rebound phase eventually that we get to, where we're working to develop the vaccine, for example, and expand broadband now that we realize that all our children are going to be learning at home. And then finally, eventually we get to a reimagine and restructure. What are the opportunities we have in the wake of these multiple forces in our country right now to think differently about how our systems work and what's most needed? I'm going to pause there.
Okay. Wonderful. And we'll come back to some of these themes, Stephanie, especially around, some interesting ideas around pooling, what you're seeing in terms of volunteerism and activism, and also which phase, the three phases are we. Ankur, let me turn to you. If you can give us your perspective in your role as a Chief Strategy Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You obviously have an overview. You obviously have a direct impact in terms of a large pool of capital, but also, I would imagine, a pretty good overview in terms of what's happening in the philanthropic sector. What are you seeing? What's been the big shift in 2020 at a macro level compared to previous years?
Yes, pleasure being here. And as everybody would probably agree with, 2020 is a year that we probably want to put behind us on various fronts. But there have been, as they say, like in every, there's always a silver lining somewhere. And one of the silver linings has been giving has gone up. 90% of donors have said that either they've kept their level of funding or they've increased it. If you look at small donors, they've gone up. The collectives that Stephanie talked about, they've gone up. Just the number of funds, like for people who are focused in India, there are like multiple funds. There are multiple funds in the US, like Power Off, or in India, the Combat India COVID Relief Fund. So there are just many of these that have increased, and giving has gone up, which is kind of lovely. The other thing that's also been interesting and good, and it's, again, there's a dark side to it and there's a silver lining to it, which is COVID has increased has surfaced a fair amount of issues around gender violence or intimate partner violence, which, funding had been increasing and focus had been increasing on it over a while. But I've been hearing so many stories about just a major push in terms of trying to understand and address those issues. So those have gone up, and so that's been great. There's the dark side of all of these things is that if you look at the statistics, 1.6 million jobs in the US in the nonprofit sector were lost between March and May, mostly in health and education. 2/3 of African nonprofits believe that their funding is going to go down. 16% of Indian NGOs think they may not be able to run in 12 months because they just don't have enough capital. And so there is a bit of the macro level of funding has gone up, which is nice, but the needs have gone up significantly faster. And so net, what we're seeing is a massive shortfall. So if, there are many donors on this call, if you were ever waiting for a moment to think that this is where you want the impact of your funds, the impact of your giving to be high, this is the moment. This is probably the moment for us in our times where every dollar, every rupee is going to matter a lot. And if people want to know how to give and where to give, there are many ideas out there, and I'm happy to share some of the avenues, but just this is the moment for all of us to pitch in.
Thank you, Ankur. And I want to come back to you, subsequently, and I want you to sort of put it together for us, as you talked about if the amount of money is going up, but at the same time, you're seeing a large number of NGOs struggling, where is that money going, right? I want you to come back and, for you and Stephanie to tell us what's happening over there. Sumir, I want to turn to you. You are known as a philanthropic donor across a range of causes. And I want you to tell us at a personal level, at an individual level, what's changed for you, in 2020 compared to 2019?
Yeah, definitely. Firstly, I just want to, Sri, thank Indiaspora for this fantastic philanthropy event. They've done a great job. And Sri, thank you for moderating our panel. I would say 2 or 3 things have changed, Sri, to your question. One thing that's changed, picking up on something that Ankur was saying, I'm not surprised that small donors like me have increased our giving, because the need has never been greater. So if I look at India today, one of the big challenges, as we all know, has been that the lockdown has really impacted India disproportionately compared to other countries, because 80% of our labor force is informal income. So, for most of us, for many of us, I shouldn't say, but most of us in the US, we get a salary. As long as we keep our jobs, we get a salary whether there's a lockdown or not. We may be sitting at home, but we get a salary. In India, there was such a huge loss of income among such a large part of the underprivileged group population that, I think one thing I feel, Sri, is the need's never been higher. Mm-hmm. And I think that's definitely my firm and I were giving more than we've ever given because of that higher need. And a sense of what Ankur was saying, that the time is now. So fully agree with that. I think the second thing that's changed, and then I'll hand back to you, Sri, to continue panel discussion. Second thing that's changed is the way that both for-profit and not-for-profit organizations succeed. There was a way to succeed pre-COVID, maybe having a development team or development staff for a not-for-profit, calling on a lot of people. That model is obviously broken. The whole high touch ability is gone thanks to COVID. Mm-hmm. And I see the not-for-profits that are succeeding are the ones that understand that the world has changed and adapting to it. It creates a lot of challenges, but one of the great opportunities that I see today with the smart not-for-profits is we actually all have a lot of time on our hands thanks to COVID. Most of us donors, we're not traveling anymore, right? We're stuck at home, so we're available anytime. And so I think there's an opportunity for younger not-for-profits to kind of reach out a lot more, and people will be a lot more available to listen than, frankly, in normal times when everyone's so busy. I mean, people are still busy now, but I think that's one thing I would just encourage a lot of younger not-for-profits to do, to just be a lot more upfront and take advantage of the fact that Zoom makes it so efficient and across borders and without travel and all of that. And I don't see enough not-for-profits doing that. So it doesn't surprise me, the point that was made, that many of them are struggling, because I think also the industry has not, I shouldn't call it industry, but to some extent the not-for-profit community hasn't adapted fast enough, I think, to COVID. And it's really hurting fundraise. It's really hurting the potential that's out there,
And Sumir, let me stay with you for a minute, right? So you talked about the fact that, in 2020, the amount of money that you're giving or WestBridge is giving has gone up. Give us a sense of where is it going, and has your pie chart changed from 2019 to 2020? Have the causes changed?
Yeah, pretty much we have added 2 new ones, but we've maintained the current portfolio plus 2 new ones. And the 2 new ones we've added are one in the area of, supporting child workers in India. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one actually in the area of, promoting better chess players in India. So 2 very different kinds of not-for-profits, Okay. So those are 2 we've added, and partly it depends on what people at the firm are, what speaks to them. We try to amplify those voices. Got
it. Stephanie, let me come back to you. So tell me a little bit about the difference in terms of your giving, your allocations, right, between 2019 and 2020. Give me a sense of what's the difference over there.
Yeah, so our foundation, the Raikes Foundation, works in the areas of student education and student and youth homelessness in particular. And so we have kind of been both responding horizontally within the issue areas we work in, putting new lenses onto that work and trying to lean into where COVID and the movement for Black Lives and other forces have exposed gaps. At the same time, we've launched new giving initiatives. So we launched a COVID response fund early in Seattle, was at the forefront. And so we had the opportunity to both give to what the Seattle Foundation was doing and to launch our own efforts to respond. Similarly, we had we created a Black Leadership and Power Fund where we were able to really invest in the leadership of communities of color. And we began working more across our silos. So thinking about if we have an education program and have youth homelessness, we knew very well that one of the hardest hit populations was going to be homeless students trying to learn with very few resources and no place to call home. And so we immediately set up a collaborative effort to begin aggregating pooled funds and responding to that crisis in Washington State in partnership with many others.
Got it. Got it. Ankur, and what about you? Where are you seeing the allocations change as you look at your giving?
Yeah, and I'll also tie that into your other question about why are nonprofits struggling at a point where giving is going up so much? So we've probably, the numbers are unclear right now because we're still in the midst of it, but north of $500 million giving has increased. And most of that giving at the Gates Foundation is sort of, I'd say a majority of it is in the R&D space. Okay. So a lot of it has gone into vaccine development, new therapeutics development, diagnostics development. A chunk of it has gone into sort of making sure that and I'm sure everybody knows this and people are reading this, but a lot of the vaccine supply is getting cornered by the developed world. And so the US, the UK, the Frances, and the Germanys of the world, and they're putting a lot of money in, but they're effectively trying to make sure that their populations get covered. And one of the things we are doing with a whole bunch of other players is trying to carve out enough supply for the lower middle income countries. And so that's been a big chunk of the push. There's also just been a lot of work. And again, back to the point Sumir was making about livelihoods have been lost in this process. And in a country like US, we have the ability, the federal government has the ability to do a $2 trillion relief package to kind of, but you go to India, you go to other countries in Africa, just the fiscal space is not there. And so that's the place where a lot of philanthropy has stepped in to say, okay, we're going to come in and play the role of providing social protection in places where just governments don't have the ability to do that. So a lot of funding has gone into that. And if I just think about, we're working with a lot of Indian partners, and some of them are, the Indian diaspora has played a role in it. But like, if you just think about the Tatas and the Nilekanis and the Piramals of the world, like they've all put like hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's all going towards stuff that just in 2019 was not a cost center. And so you're spending a lot more money, but it's going to things that just are new needs in the world.
And Ankur, there are clearly new needs that have been discovered in 2020 because of the pandemic, right? So there's a lot of money that's going into healthcare areas that, as you mentioned, it could be vaccine development, it could just be PPEs, as Stephanie talked about. So there are a whole bunch of areas. What is your sense of what's happening to the old causes? And I'm using the word old causes sort of very deliberately, right? But these are causes that still have a need. Yeah. The point that you made about 1.6 million jobs gone in the non-for-profit sector, it's not that the need that these jobs or these people were sort of fulfilling. It's not that the need has gone away. What's happened to the old causes, so to speak?
Yeah, no, they're all struggling across the board. And so if I just take an example of health, which is the place where I know a little bit more about, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about education also, but just health, measles campaigns, measles vaccination campaigns. You know, it's one of the biggest deltas in terms of lives saved. And over the course of the last 6 to 9 months, because health systems in Africa have basically shut down, and nobody wants to go to a health post because, you know, there's an increased risk, and the health workers are not there and the supplies are not there. We've meaningfully increased the risk of a measles outbreak and a whole bunch of increased mortality in under 5 lives. Some estimates are that it may actually be higher than the lives we're losing because of COVID. And so there's just a series of these things where there were great things that were happening in the world. And so, and Bill and Melinda put this letter out every year as part of a goalkeeper's report. And this is probably the first year. If you look at the trends over the course of the last 20 years, the world has just been doing great in terms of reducing the number of children under the age of 5 that die. This is the first year we're probably going to see a reversal in trend. And that's just because of the fact that the old causes are not getting enough attention. And some of it is because there's not enough funding, but some of it is just our ability to work on it is just constrained with all of the lockdowns.
Got it. So Ankur, I'm going to repeat one thing that you said. I'm going to repeat it often on this conversation, which is don't wait, right? Don't wait to give. If you're looking for a perfect time, this is not going to be a perfect time, but this is as good a time as any. Sumir, I want to come to you. You know, you talked about an increase in giving this year, right? What is your sense of, you know, as you think about your personal philosophy, is your sense that in 2021, let's assume that the pandemic goes away, who knows if it will or not, but let's assume, let's be optimistic, it goes away. Are you going to snap back to what let's say, what it was in 2019, either in terms of total dollars and rupees, and also the places where you gave the money, or is your sense that, you know what, this is what it's going to be like for the next few years?
Yeah, definitely, Sri. Great question. I think that I would say 2 or 3 things, and I'll speak more to individual donors like myself and my firm. I think a lot of it depends clearly on individual financial circumstances and how capacity changes. I think the one good news is that, you know, most of donors' wealth, or a huge amount of donors' wealth, is tied to the stock market ultimately. And while at the beginning of the pandemic, the S&P 500 was down dramatically, the reality is now it's up for the year, despite the pandemic, as we all know. And particularly if you're a tech executive at one of the big 5, your stock might, you know, at Amazon or Microsoft, your stock is actually up like 50%. So your wealth went up actually dramatically. So even though COVID is sort of unfortunately so negatively impacted a lot of lower income folks in India, actually for a lot of the donors, COVID's been pretty good. And so there's certainly, I would say, point 1, Sri, is a larger capacity among a lot of donors. Of course, it's individual circumstances, but I would say by and large, capacity has increased. And the need has increased. So my strong expectation is, like Ankur was saying, that sort of the amount of donations gone up in 2020. We'll clearly have to see what the markets do in 2021 and how that affects people's sort of mood and wealth levels. But if things were even to stay sort of flattish from here, I think I don't see a reason why it would go down next year. I think it would be flat to up again, because people do see the need. The need is not going away. Like Ankur was also saying, and Stephanie was alluding to, India doesn't have the fiscal capacity to strongly respond the way the US has, so that sort of buffering is not going to come from the government. So my strong expectation, Sri, would be that, you know, as long as there's sort of not a major down in the markets, I think next year would be sort of even stronger than this year in terms of giving.
Got it. That actually is, it's a very hopeful outlook. So I'm hoping that will turn out to be true.
I hope so too. I hope so too. That's our plan, at least. Yeah, I hope so.
We are all hopeful, because a world in which the stock market would have crashed with the increased needs, because philanthropy needs to be counter-cyclical, but it never is as counter-cyclical as we want it to be. And so it's just been great that we've at least, that has been one thing going in our favor.
Great.
Yeah, and I do think some of that also is because we've had giving vehicles that maybe we haven't always had historically in big disasters. The growth of donor advised funds in particular as a way that people give had these kind of resources that were already set aside for a philanthropic purpose. And so we did see big increases from all of those major financial institutions that hosted those donor advised funds, because they are filling that the money was set aside, it was there, and it's not right now as market sensitive. So that was an upside. But I will also say that to Sumir's point, yes, and it is hard because this multiple crisis that we're facing has exacerbated the wealth inequality in our country. And you know, it was already trending that way, but it's become even more stark as people who were contract workers, people who were driving Ubers, people who were perhaps working in theaters and other things have lost their jobs immediately. And you know, and the market continues to accumulate. That's going to be a challenge, I think, in the longer term in the marathon for our democracy.
And Stephanie, I was going to go there in any case, but could you talk a little bit about where there are still major gaps in terms of needs? And I know your sphere is primarily in the US, but even if you could talk to that, you know, for the people, you know, who are listening and watching you. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I'd love to, and I will apologize because I do have that US lens. Our work is focused here, but I mentioned earlier on the 3 phases of disaster response and how we think about that. And you at the time were saying, oh, how are we doing on that? You know, most of the data we have, we being our platform Giving Compass, we have aggregated many of these funds that have emerged that are opportunities for donors to give in a pooled way toward a cause. And we have, you know, over 700, I think now, there are over 800 that have been created. I think we have 500 some, which are open to individual donors. And we see the majority of those, 80%, some more than that, are focused on that early relief phase, responding to the immediate crisis. And maybe another, you know, small proportion are going to the rebound, but there's very few, maybe 27 total out of the 700 last I looked, were at that reimagine and restructure. And when we think about the marathon that we're going to be in as a country and responding to all of what's happening, I do think that that's where we have an opportunity, and that there are some gaps. What can we do as we think about the ways that COVID has shown us some of the fissures and the kind of rocky ground in our country, to, for example, build advocacy power for organizations to push for policy change that will really be a lever in the future, or to invest in building the political and economic power of communities of color that have really been disproportionately affected. So those are the places where I see real opportunity now.
Got it. And Ankur, from your perspective, do you want to talk about India maybe more specifically, given the audience we have, and talk to where there might be the biggest gaps? Yeah,
and let me keep it at a more conceptual level, and then if people are interested at some point, we can go to the more concrete. But the 4 or 5 big areas, livelihoods, it's just been hit so much, and I can't repeat it enough times at the point that Sumir made. 80% of India is informal. Lockdowns, just nobody has a bank account or enough savings to get them through a rainy day. There are lots of organizations helping people in this world. That's just a big, but the gap is so much larger than anything that's coming in. And so that's one big area. health, it's surprising given how much money is going into health in this, that it still is a big gap. And it's the kind of things that I said, is the health systems have shut down. And so, you know, we in India, we pushed for saying people should deliver in facilities and should, you know, should access all services in the healthcare facilities. But the healthcare facilities are just not, they're starting again, but they're constrained. And so there's a big need over there. Gender equality, I alluded to that in the beginning, but that's a major thing. Mm-hmm. All crisis, all of these issues are almost always sort of biased against women. This one has been too. It's true in terms of sort of gender violence. It's true in terms of livelihood lost. And so just there is a massive need over there. And so that's probably the third one. And the fourth one I'd go to is education. And we all have children who are sort of out of schools or not learning. And the learning levels, you know, in India, there are some, you know, and Sri, you know this more than anybody else, but like the foundational learning and numeracy is just low. And some numbers are stark, as bad as 55% of kids are falling behind from a level that, you know, is just very foundational. And that's going to get worse. And so there are many organizations that are focused on trying to make sure that kids don't fall off the learning ladder. And that's been great, but there are areas to focus over there. And there are organizations that are working directly with beneficiaries, and there are organizations that are working with government. And so you kind of say, like, am I going to go direct, or am I going to work with sort of the big vehicle and work through them? And then there are some organizations that are kind of looking ahead. And this is the education one that's exciting, is where some people are saying that again, back to some silver lining, that this is actually increasing the pace of adoption, or the pace of our ability to provide better education to many through hybrid models. And so that's shifting. And so there's a world in which the needs over there are just going to increase a lot.
Great. And I should mention that, you know, I personally, I think, Ankur, you were referencing this, but I've been personally involved in this whole area of foundational learning and numeracy in India. The new education policy that was announced a month or two ago, they've created a foundational learning and numeracy mission in India to really make sure that children up to the ages of, let's say, 0 to grade 3 have the ability to really build a strong foundation, which I think is a very exciting mission. Sumir, I'm going to turn to you for the last word. And this is, you know, a lot of people in the audience who would like to know, as you look at causes that you select, I understand you talked about the fact that some of your partners may have picked up one cause or another, but beyond the specific causes, what are you looking for in organizations? How do you pick an organization to back and to give money to? And has that changed? You mentioned one of the changes, which is that, you know, you expect them to be more digital in the COVID era than they were maybe even 6 months ago. So tell us a little bit about how do you select a cause, or actually more specifically an organization that you would pick to back?
Yeah, well, we are neophytes compared to Ankur and Stephanie, who have far more experience than I do. But I will say this, that our approach has been, you know, number one, I think pick a cause that speaks to someone, either myself or one of my colleagues, and I think that someone feels passionately about within our firm, or personally, if we're giving it personally. Number two would be trying to really make sure that you know, organizations are run for a deep impact and very leanly. And so we look for those things. And then third, I would say,
And by lean, you mean like you look at things like cost to revenue or cost to fundraised ratios and stuff like that?
Yes, very much so. We look at, because we obviously have, we're not as big as a foundation. We're tiny, we're small donors. So we want to really make sure our money goes as far as possible. So we really look for organizations that are really incredibly cost efficient in delivering the benefit to the beneficiaries, and very thoughtful about how to use limited capital to do that. So as much of it can go to the end beneficiary as possible. And so we look at some of those efficiency metrics, Sri. And then the last thing I would say is just really focus on good governance, try to get a sense for what kind of people are the leaders of the organization and what kind of people are involved at the board level. If we see someone like you on a tree, we get very excited, I would say, not to flatter, but we like to see good governance, I'd say those are some of the things that matter to us that we tend to look for, but frankly, we're early in our journey and we're learning, we've just embarked on this journey the last 4 or 5 years. So we're new to it compared to Ankur and Stephanie.
And Sumir, you keep talking about yourself being a small donor. I must tell you, I know the various causes that you give to, and you have deep impact across a whole range of causes.
You're kind, but we're not the Gates Foundation. But thank you.
Yes, not everyone can be the Gates Foundation. So we've come to the end. Sorry. So we've come to the end of our panel discussion. So thank you so much, Stephanie, Ankur, and Sumir, for a wonderful, wonderful discussion. I hope people who are listening, watching, took away some key points. For me, the main one was don't wait. Don't wait. Give now, right? There's no better time to give than now. And so there is no perfect time. It's not going to come. It's not going to come in 3 months. It's not going to come in 2 years. Give now. People are hurting. People need the money, and give now. So thank you all. I'm going to turn it back to Indiaspora, and thank you for hosting this event.
Thank you, Sri. And thank you, Stephanie, Ankur, and Sumir, for sharing your thoughts and perspective on this very important topic. Some really great information and some really good examples. Thank you again.